Every year at this time when I get to stand before a group of people and share the Christmas story, a story that, and not the Christmas story where you don't shoot your eye out, the other Christmas story, I always think, what can I say that people haven't already heard? Because year after year after year, we hear this story. But there's something amazing about this story for me. Every year when I'm reading it and discerning what it is the Spirit is leading me to say, I see something different. I see something in a way that I can apply it to my life today that I didn't see the year before. And I've told this story from many different angles. I've shared this story as if I were the donkey who went to get food out of my food trough, and there was this slimy baby in my feed trough. I have shared this story from Joseph's point of view. I have shared this story from the Magi. I've even been the innkeeper's wife in a sermon one year, because there's so many different characters in this story. But this year, I wanted to think about, and I was struck by this idea of there being no room for Joseph and Mary when they were seeking a place to stay. Now, I'm going to tell you something that most honest pastors will tell you. Don't go to seminary. It will ruin these stories for you. Because in seminary, when you really do a deep dive into these stories, number one, Luke is the only gospel that mentions an inn at all, and it's only saying that there was no room in the inn for them. But scholars believe that the word inn that we have translated into the word inn is from the Greek Catalina, which simply meant guest room. So we think sometimes that Joseph and Mary showed up to the Bethlehem version of a Hilton without a reservation when everybody's coming into town to be counted for the census, when the reality is they may have gone to multiple people's homes looking for a guest room and a place to stay. And they show up at this particular house, the only poor fellow that ever gets mentioned as being the one to turn them away, but he at least provides them a manger and at least a roof over their head. So instead of there being no room in this big hotel, imagine families showing up at your house unannounced, looking for a place to stay when your house is already full. But this innkeeper found a place for them to stay. So what does that have to do with us today? What I was struck by in the last few weeks as I've been thinking about this is you and I, are the innkeepers. You and I get to over and over and over and over again get to decide if there's room for Jesus. And how do we do that? Many ways. Every time we withhold judgment and extend grace, we're making room for Jesus. Every time we feed the hungry or we help those who are facing houselessness, we feed the hungry. We provide shelter for those who are looking for shelter. Every time we provide sanctuary for migrants, we're saying there's room for Jesus. Every time we say this table is open to everyone and no one is excluded, and we mean it, we're saying there's room for Jesus. Every time we have the opportunity to do the good that is ours to do and we do it, we're saying there's room for Jesus. And every time we get to reach out to those that are marginalized, as Jesus did in his whole earthly ministry, we're saying there's room for Jesus, because here's the reality. That's where we find Jesus. Hanging out on the margins. Hanging out with people that the world says, you don't matter. hanging out with people that the world says, you know what, you've made one too many mistakes for me, I'm done. That's where we find Jesus. So each and every time we show compassion, we are saying there is room for Jesus. So tonight, tomorrow, and in the weeks and the months and the year ahead, may we all remember that we are the innkeepers, and every single act of kindness makes more room for Jesus. May it be so. Amen.